Welcome back to Krown's Crypto Cave, where we are once again going to be documenting the most boring asset in the last 2 weeks of history, as Bitcoin price action is still more or less the same as what we've been seeing for the last, well, realistically, couple weeks. And on top of that, that will line up with some of our low-term time frame analysis that we spoke about yesterday, so I want to follow up on that. And then as far as the high-term time frame analyses go, well, pretty much unchanged as far as I'm concerned on that. It may even be time to resurrect the Forex Fortress or the traditional. We'll need another alliteration for that one. If you have a good one in your mind, I'm more than happy to hear it. Anyways, let's see, what do we have here? So yeah, let's go check out the Krown Chain application, which is right in front of your very face, which can be found at app.krowntrader.net. We just passed another update last night, and actually got some really cool news from the developer, which I'm actually going to be sharing probably starting early this week. Anyways, with that in mind, I do want to put the interest once again on the open interest, which is at the precipice of the top side of the range that we've been looking at for the last month and a half to 2 months now, which I really want to see a sustained break of the high term time frame range plus a sustained break of the upside of the range that we've been looking at, which is between about 1.5 billion to where we are pretty much right now at 1.7.5 billion. So regardless of what Bitcoin does here, what I want to see in order to confirm the next sort of long-term change behavior is, again, a break of the long-term range, which is the same thing as what we've been seeing for like the last, I guess, 2 months now. Anywhere above 9,900 to the upside would constitute that. Anywhere below about sorry, I almost said 6,900. It's just a good number, but the real area that I'm looking for now is about 9,000 in rising over time, plus a break of the open interest range is really going to help confirm that next change behavior for a very, 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 very nice move, of which things are winding up. And the more time that Bitcoin spends here without actually making that move, the more and more volatile and violent that move is kind of estimated. What the fuck kind of word is that? Estimated. Is implied to be. So with that in mind, let's go look at the Bitcoin dominance. It's pretty much unchanged from yesterday to today. It looks like we're just oscillating between that 64.5% to 65.5% region, of which I think looking at some of the altcoins yesterday, it did actually look like some of them were looking for some legs up. So perhaps I am going to be bearish on the Bitcoin dominance chart. Overall, the total market cap, it looks like it's pretty much unchanged. Altcoin market cap, pretty much unchanged. So it does seem to be led by just a few altcoins. So we are going to maybe see some rotations going on here. Most importantly, the fear and greed index also taken down 1 point to a 37 from a 38. Realistically, that is still the other big thing in the back of my mind's eye, saying not necessarily to get bearish just yet until we see an actual change behavior. At the end of the day, price action matters most, takes precedence, but it is interesting to see that this read is still relatively on the lower side while Bitcoin has more than doubled off the lows. Typically, you'd expect to see something, more towards at least the greedy end of the zone, and preferably, if we're coming into major tops, anywhere above like an 80 read is typically where we do find those nice long-term pivots. For right now, at a 37, it does seem to be still kind of building itself. But at the end of the day, as I just said, price action trumps all. You should use a bad alliteration there. So with that said, let's get into the actual price action charts themselves right here. And what do we see? First thing on the daily, well, Bitcoin bouncing off the 55 yesterday. I did say that we were looking for, or at least not we, but I was looking for a move down to about 9,100 or 9,000 yesterday. We didn't necessarily get it all the way down there, about 9,140 it looks like on BitMexico, and then bouncing up relatively fast right on after that. But realistically, the same sort of range is playing out here that we've been seeing for the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 days, which is probably lulling you into a sense of boredom and maybe even security, of which that's usually when we are going to expect to see a pretty massive move, as you do see the volume really curtail off on this formation in general, which, to be fair, this formation right here is still being painted as an ascending triangle, which would have bullish implications statistically speaking. But with regards to that, we will destroy this as an ascending triangle if Bitcoin goes, but what the fuck was that? I'm losing my mind, man. Bitcoin will destroy that by taking out the last spike low that we saw on 14th of June at a low price point of 88.92 on Mexico once again. Check your exchanges. It will be, a few dollars different depending upon which exchange that you're looking at. But if Bitcoin even just goes below that point, it will no longer have that nice higher low structure, and it will destroy this as an ascending triangle. And that would be one of the ways that I'd be looking for long-term downside resolution, then targeting moves into the $7,000 region very, very likely. quickly. There's another way of doing that as well, seeing as we do have this nice rising trend line right here, would be coming in somewhere a little bit above 9,000 now and rising very so slightly over time. So any sort of a 12-hour or daily total closure below there also likely does it. One of those three scenarios will likely do it. It is pretty much the same thing to me. Whether it's a wick below this area right here, doesn't matter what time frame, just a wick below, or a 12-hour or daily total closure below this area right here, both of those, all three of those would constitute a resolution to the downside. But as it stands right now, Bitcoin is still, holding its staunchness in here, and realistically, while it does look like pressure down, it does look like the yellow 21 exponential moving average is providing once again the resistance that you don't want to see in this world. The upside of the range is more or less the same. I really don't get excited about any sort of even short-term moves to the upside as long as Bitcoin's below 9,600. That means that we're kind of in like our own fuckboy range down here now, kind of similar to what Bitcoin was doing about a couple weeks ago at the beginning of June when it was hovering this region right here, kind of hinting at that upside breakout, but just never could really seem to piece it together and more importantly get those closures that we were really looking for. Well, now it's kind of like the same thing to the downside as it stands right now. So as long as Bitcoin is below 9,600, I am short-term, medium-term looking for pressure down. Does that mean I'm just randomly short in this area right here? Fuck no. Is there any sort of edge to be had going off of this little pivot point right here at 9,250? Perhaps from a momentum oscillator perspective, which we'll look at a little bit later, maybe, but I just don't see enough edge on that trade there as it is right now, especially considering that this trend line marking off the low side of the support for this ascending triangle is, well, just like a hop skip away from that area to begin with. So realistically, the picture that I'm painting here is that I'm not interested in trading this area here, just like I'm not interested in trading this area right here. On that initial break to the downside right here, yes. On the initial break to the upside right here, yes. But after that, things go back into normality, and until I actually see the next big break of the long-term range, I'm not really interested in trading this, except for maybe doing some option plays here or there, of which I'm actually long volatility right now and long deltas and short theta, which is almost I never do. But because we are at a historically low area of volatility, it would suggest that this is one of the few times that you might even be rewarded for buying premium here. So what I'm referencing right now is essentially this guy right here on the daily. The daily historical volatility percentile is, I mean, this is a fucking outlier no matter which way that you paint it. Looking at going all the way back to 11th of June, so now for literally 10 days straight, we've either been at a 1 read, a 2 read for 1 day, and then or a 0 read. So going from this at long term, we've almost, I don't think that there's actually even been this long of sustained 0 reads on volatility, or even just like in the 1 reads. We do have this example right here in September 2019, so almost a year ago now, where it was sustained there for about 6 days before having that major massive dump from 10,300 all the way to, 6,000 and 4,400 a few months later. But realistically, we don't really have anything, I think, representative of what we're seeing right now. Maybe back in 2018 as well. Again, not as aggressive here. This is actually the longest that I think that Bitcoin's gone at these levels. Maybe we could go to Stamp and go a little bit more of a deep dive into the annals of history here. Just trying to peruse back to maybe 2014 or 2015, perhaps. It is kind of funny though that when Bitcoin does get into areas of low volatility, it typically does mark downside reversals. That's not always going to be true though, so I don't think that that's fair to say. But it just is an interesting thing that we've seen in Bitcoin up until this point. The only other area that I can find here is September 2013. This one was actually to the upside, although did lead into a 35.25% retracement first before that big upside explosion. So again, usually it actually, funnily enough, it actually always has resulted in downside displeasure, if you want to call it that. And usually, if we were to mark off these areas here, we're looking, historically speaking, at moves. Well, let's just go to this one right here. This one is comparable. Again, not as aggressive as what we're looking at right now, but this one producing about a 42% move to the downside. Time after that was back on over here, of which I'm sure a lot of people remember this one, going from 6,000 to 3,000, 52% down. More recently, as we spoke about in September 2019, that was this move right here. Depends kind of like where you measure it from, but you could say 33% or all the way down to this area right here, which I think is a better estimate of that, because this is one trending move before that next big move to the upside, which would revert it, and that's 42% to the downside. And let's just find a few more and see if we can come up with kind of like a range for this, as I want to be very delicate with this here. Yeah, we have this area right here going off of this bull trap. So if we do take the high of the bull trap to the next major low, that's 58%. It's not really that fair. And to the next major low, 77%. This one right here, obviously getting a pretty nice move as well from the high of this consolidation before the next meltdown of 48.5%. And this one right here, we already measured this one out. I think that was down 35.5% or 35.25% before that next major move up, actually. And before that, not really anything worthwhile to go over. So, playing around with numbers here, if Bitcoin does break to the downside, we can kind of play around with these numbers and like just shave off, say, 40% off of current price action, which would put us back down around actually low $6,000 region, which to me, that would be demonstrative of a macro reversal to the downside. Anything below 6,900 is very, very problematic long term. And 50% down actually puts us all the way at our last closing lows from March 2020, which is actually even below 5,000. So if Bitcoin does break to the south side here, it's very unlikely to be interpreted as anything resembling long-term or even macro good, unfortunately. I mean, even a 30% dump from this area would put us, I think, at low 7,000, just doing some bad mental math. Yeah, and remember, these are all the same areas that line up with the targets for the downside breakout if Bitcoin were to get that. Now, I want to be very clear in stating this. While I am talking about these downside moves right here, just like I was talking about all the upside moves when Bitcoin was grinding the topside resistance right here, until we actually have a confirmed break of this area, they're all just ideas. There's no real trades to be made, at least for my own behalf. Of course, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor, but what I'd say about that is, it's in the cards, but it's just not actionable as a trader, in my opinion, until we actually, initiate the triggering effect. And to the downside, which we'll talk about right now, below that pivot point, I do think that there would be bounces along the way. 8,500 would be an area of interest, an area of short-term bounce interest, also along the 200x moving average for the daily right here, pretty much lining up one and the same at 8,500. Then the 382 somewhere right around 8,100-ish region, also kind of in line with the 200 simple, although it is running away a little bit from it now. Now, keep in mind, there would be a measure move to the downside from this formation all the way down to about 7,500 at the 0.5 Fibonacci retracement, also a very relevant historical area before the big breakout from 75 to, 9,000, and, in this accumulation zone right here that we saw in late 2019 as well. So good historical area, but looking at all of the historical volatility percentile settings and looking at the past results from this, would it be relevant to just look for, what would be about a 25% retracement from the $10,000 high down to 7,500? I think it's possible to reverse there, but personally speaking, I do think that things would at the very least come down to 6,900 at the 618. Same sort of thing for this one as well. Historical area coming in back from this accumulation zone right here, and also this big breakout on this uptrend, climbing the wall of worry earlier this year as well. That area I do think could actually reverse it. Same thing with this area as well. Realistically though, I'd want to see both in real time, assuming that we even get to the break to the downside to begin with. If Bitcoin does break below this area at 6,900, that's when I actually get macro bearish. And while I do think that Bitcoin would have bounces, in the lower 6,000s, probably around 5,000 as well, I think that the long term would really start to take a massive hit here, as it'd just be another macro lower high in a series of almost 3 years now of macro lower highs going back to December 2017. So at that point, does Bitcoin come back down to like 5,000, 6,000 and then put in another anemic bounce and put in another lower high overall? Maybe, yeah, and that's when the Forex Fortress becomes the next big thing. So at the end of the day, the real chart looks like this, right? This is linear scale, and this is technically the way that we should be looking at it. But let's talk about the upside as well, because right now we still do not have resolution, so it's not really fair to just only talk about the downside when we haven't really accurately gone over all of the due diligence for the multiple scenarios here that can play out, which things are looking bearish right now, to be fair. I mean, if you look at the short-term timeframes and the high-term timeframes and even the macro timeframes, well, to be fair, it's mostly on that side. There's more points in the bears court than the bulls court. Also looking at this right here, the 4-hour time frame, we do see that the 200 simple, this white moving average, is actually taking a pretty nasty negative slope. The reason why this is relevant is because as long as we are living below that, we will naturally get the death cross on the simples, which actually we might have already gotten, because I typically don't even look at the 50 simple, which I have right here. Oh, it already is death cross actually. Huh, that sucks. But the big one that I want to be looking at is the exponential moving average death cross, which is the green 55 and the purple 200. You could also use a 50, going to be the same thing essentially. It's only five periods different right there on the 4-hour, which typically does hold some pretty good, has some pretty good results in the history of Bitcoin. And that means that the 200 exponential moving average is absolutely very, 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 very important for BULAs to hold within this region, because the second that you lose it is the second that you also start to initiate short-term momentum taking a massive downside turn at the precipice of the long-term downside range trigger, which can have that domino effect of playing out all the downside targets that we just spoke about. That's essentially what I'd be worried about if I was a BULA right now, which I suggest that you not be a part of any BULA or BERA gangs. Just be a part of the trader gang. Don't join a gang at all, maybe. But as far as that goes, we also do have a nice short-term range here. So while I was just talking, about a lot of the downside, you can use this as a nice short-term pivot as well, right around 92.50-ish region. Probably plays out itself, but again, there's just not that much edge on it as far as the technical trade goes. Maybe another $200 trade to the downside, at which point I'd be looking for another anemic bounce, likely off of 9,000 or 90.50 or whatever it ends up being. By the same token, to the upside, if Bitcoin can regain the white 200 simple on the 4-hour, it would help, but it doesn't really do all that much. And that is currently speaking at 94.50-ish region. What I really need to see for Bitcoin in order to get short-term and medium-term bullish once again is a move back above the high of this range that we put in this last week on the 16th of June at 95.92.04. If that were to happen, I'd look for a very quick extension all the way up to this blue box territory right here, somewhere around 9,900, maybe even 10,000. And at that point, this really starts to look like an ascending triangle that actually wants to act like an ascending triangle and break out the top side. Remember, any one of these formations, whether they have like a bullish name or a bearish name, it means nothing. It only matters which way that they break out, because I've seen every fucking pattern break out every way that you're told they're not supposed to. It's all about statistics in this game, and that's what technical analysis is for. Anyways, using that as a nice pivot point to the upside for the short term and medium term is fine, or at least that's where that I'll be doing it. And also if I'm looking for like a 4-hour closing basis, if I wanted to make a little bit of an expedited decision upon that, perhaps I would use 9,500 as a 4-hour closing pivot for that as well. I think that that's actually a little bit less of a good way of doing it than just waiting for a wick higher than what we see right here. But still, could it be that Bitcoin just takes out this high right here, goes up to this blue box territory, and then shatters once again to the downside? Yeah, possible. It's very possible. So I really can't get too bullish if, for the long term until Bitcoin actually closes a 4-hour dildo above 9,900, of which that's when glory times, I believe, are once again very likely coming. For the more conservative traders, I'd use 10,000, but I do think getting back above 9,900 would be good enough in and of its own right. And that would initiate a measure move to the upside, which is equally as impressive, going all the way to, or actually even more impressive, going all the way to an implied target of 11,000, which would actually revert this long-term 3-year macro trend of putting in weekly lower highs, as we would be implied for a higher high above this February 2020 high that we saw at about 10,522, as the measure move was again pointed towards a little bit north of 11,000. So if that were to happen, that would be a change of behavior here. And to be fair, from a weekly perspective, major moving averages are in a more bullish perspective right here. We are having a decent bounce off the 10 simple, and that all looks well and good. Keep in mind, it's also an ascending triangle, so technically statistics are more on the side of the upside resolution here if you're going off patterns, which I wouldn't solely go off of, but fair enough. And momentum oscillators for right now are technically still to the upside. That's unlikely to stay though, because we do see that with any sort of a weekly dildo closure this week below 95.27 and 10 cents will naturally force these babies back onto the downside. And anytime that we've seen them cross the downside from this region in the more critical zone for the weekly Stokes, it has not been good for BULAs, even in the context of a bull market going all the way back to 2016. So we're going to make the biggest excuse for it right here and just kind of measure this one off of, and then we'll start to kind of wrap up the big important parts. So we're going to go to an actual long-term macro uptrend So this would be the most forgiving read that you could look for on something like this. And anytime that we've seen this signature where we actually do confirm across the downside in the critical zone, well, let's measure it out. Going from last high to next low, that's 42% right there. Drop down. Sounds kind of familiar to, the historic volatility percentile read that we were looking at earlier. Looking at this one right here, from last high to next low, 35.5% or 35.25%. Going from, what's our next one right here? You could use this one as well, although it's not even as aggressive, 33.5%. We have this example right here doing almost 40%, 39.5% it looks like. Then we have this guy right here putting in another high for about 43.75% to the downside. And then we have the $20,000 high, which produced, 70, well, we're still dealing with it actually. Anyways, my point is that even in the context of an overall upturn, when we do get that read on weekly Stokes, we typically do, historically speaking, play out 35 to 50% downside, which is very much in line with the historical volatility percentile numbers that we were looking at earlier. So if the downside resolution does come, it's very much relevant to think that low 7,000 is extremely likely to get hit, and even 6,000 is in the card. I mean, 40% down would put us at the 200 simple and 200 exponential moving average on the weekly here, which long term has never been broken, technically speaking, for Bitcoin on an open and closed basis. Doesn't mean that I can't, and I probably would be looking for another bounce off that area, a very nice bounce probably as well, a very tradable bounce even. But man, really have to start thinking about what's this picture going to look like long term if that were to happen. So for right now, things are still unconfirmed, but with each and every passing moment, we get closer and closer to the resolution of this formation, and the longer that we spend within this formation, the more and more violent the resolution will very likely be, as we've never seen historical volatility percentile this low on Bitcoin for this long on a daily time frame or a 2-day time frame, although the weekly is not actually that comparatively low, although it is it in single digits? No, it's not. Hey, what? Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. It's in the lower echelons of it, but it's actually not. It's actually been lower before. Anyways, the thing with this is that we've already seen CMEs close for the week, and remember, CMEs do have like a $50 to $100 premium on price action for spot, which was dissipating this week to be fair. So I think more around like $50 now, which they closed at 93.15 on Friday, and that means that when they open up later tonight at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, we're going to very likely see this confirmed to the downside, assuming that things open below 9,500, which very likely they do, although not a certainty, of course. And then on top of that, what was the other thing that I wanted to mention here? Maybe on the daily. On top of that, yes, the daily, as long as we are below that last high on the 15th of June at 96.30, this is just looking like another anemic lower high, and this starts to look a lot more like distribution with a target short-term back down to the 55, which is around a little bit under 9,000, which again, that puts us right around that last prior spike low from the 14th of June, which is problematic. So overall, if Bitcoin does start to inch its way back down towards this region, doesn't necessarily imply a breakdown, but getting back down there close enough while all of the other things are starting to turn around, and you start looking at the high term time frame momentum oscillators, starts to paint a not so healthy picture for Bitcoin BULAs there. Let's go down to the low term timeframes now, of which I typically like to avoid on the week. I typically like to avoid any trading on the weekends or any analysis on the weekends, to be quite honest with you. But looking at the 4 hour right here, what's Bitcoin doing on the 4? It's just printing lower highs and lower lows. I mean, it's literally just following the downtrend. Looking at 4 hour Stokes, they are up this whole way since 2 days ago on this low right here. Bitcoin price action has been flat. So to me, this looks more like a bearish reset, and it will cross back onto the downside with any sort of a 4 hour delta closure below 92.71, it looks like, which is essentially our kind of like low structure right here. So any sort of a close below 92.50, yes, momentum also just turn on back to the downside. So we can start to now come up with pivot points for these short-term timeframes. Not that I'd be using them myself, but it's, this is fucking analysis, so it's fun to do, because otherwise we're just going to be saying the same shit every fucking day. Anyways, apologies for my language there, but looking at the 3 hour, we have hidden bearish divergence between this point and this point. Nice. but 3 hour Stokes headed up all the way. However, price action looking to me like another lower high. And where does it turn on back to the downside? 92.68. Okay, what about the 2 hour? actually turns back onto the downside at 93.50ish region, so needs to maintain those needs to maintain a close above there in order to keep the very short term momentum up, and the hourly even worse, 93.90. Keeps the short-term momentum to the upside, and this again looks like it's putting another lower high, as I think we even have regular bearish divergence here on the hourly, so we're going to zero. But now let's make a correlation between the low-term time frames and the medium-term time frames, and what do you know, 12-hour Stokes will once again cross onto the downside, rejecting the bullish control zone here. If Bitcoin price action closes the next 12-hour dildo, which closes in 4 hours and 6 minutes and 57 seconds below 93.50. So that will not only turn the 12-hour momentum to the downside, but also I believe the 2-hour hourly, of course, as well. And then the 3 and 4 hour change below 92.50. Let's look at where the daily changes as well. The daily will cross the downside, rejecting getting out of the bearish control zone. So holding it in there as long as today's daily dildo essentially closes below the 21 exponential moving average at 94.50ish region. Again, maintaining that lower high structure. So I do feel very strongly about this being a very good pivot to the upside. If Bitcoin does take out 9,600 to the upside, I would strongly look for a move 300, maybe even $400 higher, with likely a resolution to the upside at that point, because this will look very bullish if that were to happen. But for right now, pressure is mounting to the downside. And is this just a continuation of the Joule sell signal that we saw like 3 weeks ago? And again, if you have access to the Joule, understand that these things take a while to play out. Perhaps, yes, if you see this get pulled in once again and then spit out, that will be a continuation halt of your short signal, essentially. As far as the daily goes, do we have any hidden bear or hidden bullish divergence here? No, just looks like one descending. It's starting to look like a descending triangle here. Someone actually pointed this out a while ago, which I disagree with. Now it's starting to actually look like such. So I could very easily change on that one. Although, again, price action matters more than anything else. So Jesus Christ, don't need to make it any more difficult than it needs to be. Looking at the 2-day Stokes, headed down and nosediving pretty damn hard. Will remain to the downside as long as we're essentially below that last prior 9,600 high, even $100 lower than there. And do we have any hidden bullish divergence here? We did have some here, which Bitcoin did put in a nice rally from there, going from 8,900 to 95. But I think that's mostly played out, because giving it up and making a new low below that on this particular drive is not good. But again, postulating things before they actually happen is not a good habit to get into. Now, the 3-day is the one harbinger of perhaps savoriness. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with like some Jesus metaphor here. But you do, or technically speaking, there is potentially hidden bullish divergence in the making here if Bitcoin can confirm this area as a local low. How would it confirm it as a local low? Well, we need a clear stop and reverse point, of which stopping and reversing right now so far at the 21, which is good, but needs to get that continuation above where it's the same fucking areas as what we're looking at on the daily, 9,600. Take out this area to the upside right here, and yes, we do have a confirmed local low. And then yes, I would target a move back up towards 99 or 10,000, and this would start to look very, very bullish. It starts to look very good. But for right now, it's got a lot to prove itself still. So I'm not saying that it can't happen. I'm just saying that understand that the longer that Bitcoin stays below that level, the more and more shaky it does get. Hesitation, once again, is not good within this region. As the more time that transpires, while all these momentum oscillators on the low-term timeframes are pointed north right now, it will naturally dissipate and turn into a bearish reset if Bitcoin fails to essentially get back above even the short-term pivot at 9,600. That's really the message that I can sort of synthesize everything down into today. As long as Bitcoin's below 96, I'm bearish, essentially. But I'm not really trading for it, except for just some shitty option positions, which I fucking hate buying premium, but I actually did it. So fair enough. We don't have anything to update on traditional markets because they don't move during the weekends. So that's actually kind of nice. Forced relaxation there. And let's see, we're already 28 minutes into this video. So with that in mind, to the upside, I guess I could talk about it a little bit more, or do we want to talk about it a little bit more? It would be a massive change behavior, even just getting back above 10,500-ish region. That would very likely initiate a move back up to 11.5, the same area that Bitcoin's been getting distributed on ever since January 2018. You already know this. I've said this a million fucking times, or you probably just know it from yourself because, well, we've all been looking at the same things for years on end now. And from a volume profile perspective, you can see big changes behavior above this area right here, and then even more so macro changes above the 11.5 area right here. So as long as Bitcoin's below that, can't really get too excited about moon boy dreams. And for right now, Bitcoin still has a chance, but I want to see it really take its take that leg up sooner rather than later if it is going to actually pull through here. Now, I should keep in mind that the monthly still looks more or less fine. I don't have any problems with this monthly right here. In fact, the monthly would still be more or less bullish to me as long as we are especially above 8,600. And from a momentum oscillator perspective, this is bullish as well. Rejecting the bearish control zone and pointed back north, and monthly RSI above the exponential in the neutral zone looks more or less constructive and healthy over the long period of time. So how does that fit into the greater picture? Well, the monthly is still bullish overall. So keep things into perspective, because realistically, it's very difficult for me to be potentially bearish on Bitcoin while I am simultaneously bullish on NASDAQ or SPY or anything in traditional markets for that matter that represents a big indice. So in this case right here, looking at NASDAQ, we had a very good weekly close. I'd say as long as this thing's above 9,800, which I do think it will come back down and test it to open up this week. But as long as it's above it on like a daily closing basis, I'm still bullish on this, looking for new all-time highs. Now, if 9,800 is taken out to the downside, or on a daily, I need to adjust that number. It's more like 9,700 on a daily closure. But if that area is taken out to the downside, then yes, I would look for a much more deeper retracement, probably all the way back down to the low 9,000s, maybe 9,100-ish region. But I would still be looking for an overall opportunity in this one. I don't think that is going back down to the overall lows here, unless if something drastic happens, which would essentially be closing below that 9,100-ish level. Then we could talk about maybe mid 8,000s, and then below there we can talk about a return to the prior lows. But before that happens, I think that this was just the major generational opportunity, perhaps. And while I wasn't necessarily bullish on this part right here, I was right around here, which I actually do feel quite happy about. Although I don't trade it, so it doesn't really matter. So who gives a fuck? Just silly social points, I suppose. If anyone's even listening, if anyone's even listening at this point, anyways. Looking at SPY, same sort of thing here, but not as aggressive. We could use this last weekly dildo as a nice pivot both ways. If we take out the top side of it at 31.56, I would be looking for a retest of the prior highs that we saw in February of this year, around or above 333. If we take out the low side of this weekly dildo at 29.23 and 3/4, I'd be looking for a retest, probably back down to this region right here, anywhere between mid 270s and maybe even the 200 simple and 200 exponential average, depending upon how bad things get. And you can almost do the same thing for Bitcoin as well. Looking at the weekly, just looking at the weekly for CMEs right here, a break above or below last week's doji-ish type dildo is very likely to get this next major move. Below it would imply a move below 89.30. Above it would imply a move above 96.30. Funny how that works. It's basically the same areas that we're looking at in spot, and just by going above or below one of those areas, it very likely does get the next major resolution here. So I would be hard pressed to think that we're going to have another week of consolidation within this range. I think that is extremely likely that we see the break of this range this coming week. I mean, if it doesn't break by the end of this week, it's just like, all right, Bitcoin's like literally actually dead. Bitcoin's literally actually dead, or actually no, it wouldn't be dead. It would actually be exactly what you want. Here's what you want if you actually do believe in the store of value narrative. Well, we've all agreed upon a price on Bitcoin, and it's about $9,365. That sounds pretty good to me, especially for an asset that's pretty much used for nothing right now. Obviously, yes, I understand that you can do some backdoor deals with it and shit like that. And if you really are dead set on it, you can make it work, but it's not like that easy to make work, especially for like the average person. But hey, if everyone agrees on the same price, we don't need to move it anymore. No more trading is done, and it's time to move markets, my friends, for the traders out there. Because this channel is always coming from the perspective of a trader, of course, not anything more than that. Not anything less than that, really. Although, I do think that Bitcoin's a cool idea. Anyways, do we want to look at correlations today? Probably not the best way to do it, because there's really not too much to update on this as far as this goes. It's basically the same thing that we said earlier this week, although I did get some of my numbers wrong, which Bali corrected me on. But perhaps when things open up this week again, this would be a fun time to kind of talk about the good old correlations between Bitcoin and traditional markets, of which you can see here the correlation coefficient between NASDAQ futures and Bitstamp Bitcoin price action is relatively high, is what we could say. So I do like that, and this is on a weekly, so that would suggest that whatever direction we see printed in traditional markets likely does transact into Bitcoin, although although Bitcoin is relatively weak in comparison to traditional markets, as traditional markets been making new all-time highs. Bitcoin, well below its all-time highs, in fact, just trying to hold in there. But it's not over till the fat lady sings, and the fat lady ain't even here yet. Or, well, she's kind of here, but she's going to start singing soon, I think. Anyways, what else do we want to look at while we're here? Maybe look at a couple shitcoins. Why not, man? It's a boring Sunday, and it's midsummery-ish type vibes in most of the world right now. So hopefully you're just enjoying that. Looking at the weekly Bitcoin dominant, there's nothing to make off this chart. If anything, I'd be bullish off this chart, but it's just weird because let's go back to Cardano and see what he's doing. Where are you, Cardano? Where are you, little piece of absolute amazing technology? Where is this one? Where did I get rid of it? Oh, there it is. This Cardano versus Bitcoin looks like it's kind of setting in a nice reversal here. I really like the volume read on this one, and it does look like it probably heads up towards 1050 to 1100 satoshis. Still in a long-term downtrend, to be fair, so it's got a lot of work to do from the macro, but still some upside probably in this time frame as well. So alts perhaps going to be doing well versus Bitcoin here. Let's go check out Mr. Buterin versus Bitcoin as well. I'm curious what that one's printing too. And I'd have to be bullish on this read. Looks like a nice consolidation on weekly RSI, but can't make too much out of that. What I can make quite a bit out of is this guy right here, of which I've been following this trend line ever since August, September of 2019, getting the lows right here, and then more recently right here, turning back up again. I'd like to see a break above 0.026 and then target a move back up into this region right here, probably towards the 200 exponential moving average, a little bit north of 0.03 region. So altcoins probably do well versus Bitcoin here, assuming all else stays equal, which if Bitcoin breaks to the downside, I would be very hard pressed to think that most altcoins do well versus Bitcoin in that sense. But hey, that's why I don't trade altcoins. I don't. It's very, very difficult to get an edge on these things. It's just easier to look at what Bitcoin's doing and typically just kind of make a correlation between that and the altcoin rather than just straight up analyze the altcoin. But we can look at Buterin on the weekly. How's he doing? How you doing over there? Looks the same as Bitcoin, putting in that nice little descending triangle, a little bit more of a descending triangle on Mr. Buterin. Although on the daily, I'd like to go down to a lower term time frame and see what's going on here. Yeah, still working on a 4-hour as well. Nice downside resolution below about 226, we'll call it, and will break to the upside, kind of similar in the same vein as Bitcoin, if we can get a move or a 4-hour closure, more importantly, back above at the very least 234.25, at which point I'd target a move back up, likely towards the top side of this range, somewhere in the low 240s region. But again, very, very likely to follow Bitcoin and do whatever Bitcoin does. Looking at a daily, is there anything obvious here? As long as it's below the 21, I don't really see any real reason to be immediately bullish. Looks a lot more like distribution. Historical volatility percentile is absolutely crushed beyond belief there too. Litecoin looks a lot more weak than both of these. Looks a lot more like an obvious descending triangle here too. Sorry, let me actually mark this one off, but something like this. There's your support, and here's your declining tops right here. Volume signature would work out more or less as well. This is not like the best drawing, by the way, in case you're going to get in the comment section and be like, hey, that's not drawn properly. I know. But again, a break below $42 essentially, very likely to lead back on down to prices into the mid 30s. Looking at a weekly, this one looks, has a death cross on a weekly. Likely gonna fall whatever Bitcoin does. What about Stellar? We haven't picked on this one in a long time. Looks like another rejection on the 200 exponential moving average. Not good. What about Mr. Ripple's nipples? How's the XRP army doing? Looking like a death cross coming especially as long as it's below the 21. Kind of hard to be bullish on that. What about EOS? Same thing. What about NEO? Okay, that's enough of that. All right, so my eyes hurt from all of that, and now let's go back onto Bitcoin. All right, let's wrap this bitch up and send her off. Okay, if you're looking at the very, 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 we haven't even looked at probabilities. Let's actually do that right now. Okay, cool. Alrighty, so I'll keep the same area as yesterday. 9,600 the upside versus 8,900 the downside. 9,600, again, only speaks to the short-term region. 8,900 the downside, though, does speak to the long-term move and long-term resolution, of which we see on a 12-hour closure, 21.5% to the upside, on this next 12-hour closure versus 6% to the downside. So the probabilities actually did gear up in the favor of the boo laws on this one. But again, they're not really comparable areas, to be fair. On a daily closure, 28% versus 15% to the downside. So again, more in favor of the upside, and the rings actually are starting to turn a little bit here too. So maybe bulls do have a little bit more of a chance. I think it's a little bit premature to get super bearish or super bullish on this, regardless of where your allegiances are aligned. But realistically, when the trend is down on just about every time frame, up to but not including a daily right now, hard to trade against that. Also hard to trade for the downside when we're so close to a resolution, but it's just not, it's just the the triggering effect for myself just not there, and that's one of my rules. So yeah, wrapping this one up, looking at this area right here, short, very, 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 very short-term range, I would plot between 9250 and 9600. A close, or well, yeah, a close on a 2-hour or 4-hour dildo above or below that region likely does test into the high-term time frame range. To the downside, that would be 9,000. To the upside, that would be 9,900 or 10,000, but does not constitute a resolution. A resolution would be constituted with either a 4-hour closure above 9,900 or below the 377 at about 9,000, or a wick below this prior low at about 8,900, or a 12-hour or daily dildo closure below essentially that same 9,000 level as well. If one of those things happens, I'm looking for the big bad moves to the downside. 8,500 bounce target, 8,150 bounce target. Potential reversal at 75, potential reversal at 69, but overall start to look pretty damn bad. To the upside, a lot more interesting above 9,600, targeting move back up here. Any sort of a closure on any time frame that matters above this region. I'm targeting big bad moves into probably around 11,500 overall, and that's going to set it up for potentially another macro break to the upside, which then is glory times, and that would be very nice. Anyways, that's going to do it for right now. I'd like to wish you well once again. Take care, and until next time.